One, two, three, four.
You are listening to SKYLIT, the SKYLIT Books podcast. SKYLIT Books is a general interest bookstore in the Los Feliz neighborhood in Los Angeles. You can shop with us from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. or visit us online 24/7 at skylitbooks.com. Follow along at SKYLIT Books Instagram and Twitter. You can subscribe to the podcast on Podbean, iTunes, and Spotify. Thank you for listening, and now on to the episode.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to Handsell, a SKYLIT Books podcast. I'm your host, Mike Jeffrey. SKYLIT Books is an independent bookstore located in the Los Feliz neighborhood of Los Angeles, California. We've recently returned to our regular business hours at the store. We're open every day from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. We're asking unvaccinated customers to continue wearing masks, but if you're vaccinated, you can come in without one. We're still offering all our online shopping and curbside pickup through www.skylitbooks.com. And you can check out our upcoming events on our Crowdcast page, crowdcast.io/skylitbooks. Now, on to the show. I'm joined today by Marissa Levien, whose novel, The World Gives Way, was just published by Red Hook. Marissa is a writer and artist who hails from Washington State and now lives in New York with a kindly journalist and their two cats. The World Gives Way is her first novel. How are you today, Marissa?
I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for joining us. It's really a pleasure.
Yeah, this is fun. I someday hope to make it out to your bookstore in person, but it's nice to know that you're officially open for business and everything's opening up slowly but surely. That's always nice to hear.
Yeah, it's been fun and a little shocking to see people's faces again and have no capacity limits, but it makes the book selling experience a lot more fun than being behind partitions and only having 8 people in the store, that kind of thing.
I work in a bookstore in the Hamptons, and the first day that we dropped mask policies was the most surreal day on the face of the planet. So I'm with you.
Yeah. Mouths are strange to see again. Yeah.
Mouths are weird.
But you're going to read something from your book for us?
Yes, I will. So this is a passage from early on in the book. Basically, you don't really need to know much for those that haven't read it yet, aside from the fact that my main character, Myrra, has just discovered her boss, Imogene, hanging out on the rooftop terrace of their apartment building, ready to jump. And she's also informed Myrra that the world that they live in, which is also a generation ship, is breaking down and everyone's going to die. Pleasant thoughts. So I'll begin. They sat in silence for a minute or two. Myrra couldn't tell how long. Eventually, if only because she had the urge to move again, Myrra stood and leaned her elbows against the wall, looking out on the panoramic skyline. Imogene looked at her suspiciously, and when it became clear that Myrra wasn't going to try and pull her down, she followed Myrra's gaze, staring out at the buildings and the gray-blue light at the horizon. New London was a beautiful city, and this was one of the best views you could get. Beautiful and monstrous. Myrra pictured the black silhouettes of the buildings, the towers and spires, as black bejeweled teeth winking in the mouth of a monster. I think it's wrong to call it a sky if it's made with paint, metal, and lights. It's not the same thing, Imogene said out of nowhere. What does it matter if we've never known any different? This is what sky is to us, Myrra contradicted. I don't go in on nostalgia for something I've never experienced. Everyone holds up the old world as this amazing thing, but you were born here, same as me. Our mothers were born here. What could we possibly know about it? This was a suspicious sort of freedom, talking with Imogene like this. Myrra caught herself glancing sideways every time she spoke to check if she'd crossed a line. Imogene just shrugged. I suppose you're right, but there's nothing wrong in dreaming about the other kind of sky. I never thought about it, Myrra said with all honesty. She hadn't the space or time to spend philosophizing about real versus manufactured. too many other worries took priority. She had to get a handle on this situation. Worst case scenario, what do I do if Imogene is right? Myrra balked at the idea, then rallied again. It was important to anticipate the worst, so you'd be ready for it. In Myrra's experience, the worst happened more often than not. So, what's to be done if the world is ending? It might not be, she thought, to comfort herself. But just in case. If I believe you, she started. Imogene looked at her and rolled her eyes at the if. Then how long do we have before the world breaks apart? Marcus told me it would be about 2 months. But it depends. If the wrong gas pocket hits us, it could be tomorrow. She didn't want to believe Imogene. If the world breaks apart was almost too big to comprehend. But then the next thoughts hit. I'm never going to marry Jake. Han is never going to get that bar. And I am never going to grow old. Then she started thinking of all the ways she might get out of New London while avoiding surveillance cameras. Her expression must have darkened, or maybe Imogene was just following a similar thought pattern, because the next thing Imogene said was, "There's a safe embedded in Marcus's bookshelf behind the Mark Twains." I know. Imogene let out a surprised laugh. Yes, you would. She paused. You know how to access it? Palm scan. Myrra smiled. It was a good distraction, seeing the shock on her face. Imogene smiled back, but it was a sad smile. Do what you have to do, she said. A plan was already whirring into motion. She'd knock Marcus out if he was still alive, or if it was as Imogene thought and he was already dead, she'd have to take his hand. Down at Myrra's feet, Charlotte whimpered. The cold must finally be getting through her blankets. Myrra bent down and picked her up, tucking her halfway inside her robe. Charlotte wriggled around a little, but eventually her face relaxed and her eyelids stopped twitching. Myrra looked down and saw Imogene watching her daughter with a look of bone-deep grief. It surprised Myrra. This was the most care Imogene had shown Charlotte in the total of her young life. At the very end, she proved to be a mother after all. Imogene reached out and touched Charlotte's cheek. Will you take care of Charlotte? It was a harsh reminder that soon Myrra and Charlotte would be sitting alone on the terrace, and that there would be an empty spot on top of the wall where Imogene had once stood. Myrra pushed away the thought. Of course, she said, and meant it. She could feel Charlotte's breath against her skin. Imogene leaned closer to Charlotte, inspecting her face. Myrra could see the ivory powder of Imogene's foundation clinging to the soft, downy hairs on the sides of her cheeks. What must she see in my face when she looks this close? I'm so sorry, she said. It was hard to tell whether she meant that she was sorry for the way she'd treated Myrra all these years, or for telling her that it was all ending. In a rare positive moment, Myrra decided to think the best of her, and assumed she was sorry for all of it. Myrra could feel the warmth radiating off of Imogene's skin. Imogene leaned closer to her face, impossibly close, and kissed her. Then she pulled back, stood, and kicked her body out past the wall into the stillness of the air. It felt to Myrra as though Imogene's body hovered there in front of her for an unbearable length of time, so long that she worried something had happened to the gravity. Her nightgown and stray wisps of hair pooled out around her body as though in water. Her skirts hovered up around her shoulders, and Myrra saw her pale nakedness, her immaculate, vulnerable flesh. Imogene had her eyes squeezed shut and her mouth open wide enough to swallow the world. Then the moment passed, and Imogene dropped like a sickened, ungraceful lump. Myrra leaned over to watch her descend, so far down she couldn't see or hear the body's impact when it finally struck the sidewalk.
Thank you. That was Marissa Levien reading from her new novel, The World Gives Way. Thanks for that. And my immediate thoughts were, when did you start writing this book? Because I felt like I picked up on that 2016 things ending dread a little bit.
It was definitely a 2016 vibe for sure. I think I started really just constantly cyclically thinking about apocalypses right around 2016. I mostly worked on the novel in my MFA program, so it was written mostly, I'd say, in 2017 and 2018.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Where'd you get your MFA?
I went to Stony Brook MFA, which is in Southampton out in New York.
Oh, cool. Did you have any like particular mentors there who like kind of helped see this project through?
Yeah, I had a couple really, really great ones, and I owe a lot to them. The first is Susie Merrill, who wrote the book Shirley, which it got made into a movie last year. The movie was really trippy too, and it was great. The book is amazing. She's on the faculty there, and she kind of guided me and mentored me, and she read many copies of the manuscript over time, and she's got an incredible eye for plot, and she likes to kind of piece the plots of books together almost like architecture on a house or maybe like a jigsaw puzzle. She really likes to she likes to play around with that stuff, and so she was incredibly useful. I was calling her when the book was going to auction because I didn't know what the hell I was doing, and everything in between, and she was absolutely wonderful and very giving of her time. And then also Stony Brook actually has this astonishing faculty. It's kind of like this hidden gem, but my thesis advisor was Paul Harding, who
Tinkers.
yeah. Who won the Pulitzer Prize for Tinkers and is generally one of the most incredible writers I've ever met, and has a completely opposite writing style to mine, because he's one of those guys. It's just sort of like, I will create a book about a man in a room thinking about his dying father, and it will be the most incredible thing, and there will be no plot whatsoever, but it's just going to, completely slay you and destroy your soul. And meanwhile, I'm like all plot all the time, and I love that stuff. But he's also really generous with his time, and also like has that really wonderful belief that like any type of book can be a great art form. So like even though my book features a spaceship, he wasn't weird about it. He was like just really, really lovely, and he was great because I'm really into all the plot mechanics and the characters, arcs and all of that sort of thing. And he was the one that sat me down and was like, okay, but let's talk about your sentences, and would like break it down word by word and make sure that the writing was as good as it possibly could be. So I owe a huge debt of gratitude to him as well. Susie and Paul were just insanely helpful, and I'll love them forever for it.
I'm always curious when I hear people talking about working on a novel in an MFA program, because I think that it can be tricky with workshops. Like the workshop is really sort of catered to short stories. And then when you present, a chapter of a novel and it's chapter 13 and half the workshop hasn't read 1 through 12, it can be a little frustrating, I think, of having to like lay the groundwork just before they can even appreciate the chapter. But I wonder how that experience was for you.
Yeah, workshops are treacherous things. Like because I actually like I really enjoy workshops and I find them super useful. But you're right, for novels they don't always work. Stony Brook had a couple classes. In fact, the ones that I took that I found the most helpful were taught by Susie Merrill and Paul Harding. And one was called Beginning the Novel, and the other was Your Entire Novel, Let's Do This. It was like, I can't remember exactly the name of the class, but those were intensive workshops where people were reading like 150, 200 pages at a time, and then like giving you much more comprehensive notes rather than short story style notes where they're like, I'm not so sure about this word in this sentence, like where it's like, that's great, I have like 300 more pages. So right. But even with that, I also like the advice that I like to always give people whenever I've taught workshops myself or had students or just talked with fellow writers is that it's not, you don't have to take everybody's opinions. And in fact, it's a really good idea to not do that. Some of the comments that I got when I first started workshopping this were just like all over the place, and all very well intentioned, but just all over the place. But I do think that if you can get a handle on your own style and what you want to do enough, like have as good a sense of an identity as you can going in, and then in my experience, you'll find like one or two people in that workshop that are kind of picking up what you're laying down and are understanding the novel on its own merits and as it's supposed to be, and listen to the stuff that they have to say. And also, like, I've definitely had the thing where, like, I had an experience when I was first workshopping this book where a bunch of people, the book itself is essentially about an apocalypse, if that bit was not clear from the intro reading. And it's a certain mood of an apocalypse. It's much more Station 11 or Melancholia rather than something like, say, Armageddon. And my initial workshops that I did of, just say like the first 50 pages, I had basically everybody giving me notes, treating it as though it was going to be some sort of breakneck thriller Armageddon style thing. And so they're like, are there going to be like this huge fight and then they're going to race to get the piece and like, throw the nuke at the something, which is going to, then fix everything. And then those notes were all, of course, completely useless to me. But I sat there and just like the entire time being like, oh my God, nobody gets it. But then also I realized that their notes were bad, but also partially it was the fact that at that point I hadn't figured out the identity of my novel enough to guide the reader into knowing how they were supposed to regard the book. And so I was actually still able to take the notes and use them once I figured out that people weren't picking up on what I wanted the novel to be. And that probably was also a fault of mine. So then I went back and reworked and figured out how to get the mood and sort of the audience expectation that I wanted. So even bad notes can actually be good notes, but you do just have to be very careful.
Yeah, I think it's like kind of a tricky thing sometimes to accept the note, but not invite a critic into your head while you're right? Because it's like you don't want to have too many outside voices. You got to rely on instinct and things like that. But with workshop, it's sort of can feel natural to bring that whole group to your desk every day. And I don't think it helps anybody or produces any good work.
No. And also I will say that like, I feel like I was really lucky in that regard. Cause like, I don't know, I hear horror stories of other MFA programs that maybe it's just that everybody's taking themselves a little too seriously, or they're very, or it's more competitive. Stony Brook's sort of like a smaller, it's sort of like in my head, it's a best kept secret kind of a thing, because it's not something that everybody knows about, but I get to work with Paul Harding and like Amy Hempel. I was doing a short story workshop with Amy Hempel. I was like, this is crazy. This is incredible. But they kind of espouse people being kind to each other in workshops, and they're not especially cutthroat about it. I still got great notes, but there's kind of that cliche sometimes with workshops that like you show up with your short story and then everybody just finds ways to tell you that you're horrible. Which, as I understand it, is actually not that much of a cliche and can be very true depending on what workshop you're in. But I didn't have that experience. I got notes, and a lot of them were critical notes, but they were always coming from a fairly kind place, and that always helps as well. And I don't know, maybe before I was doing this, I was doing theater, and you get a really thick skin doing that, and maybe that just helps. I don't know.
I had a workshop instructor once who really kind of laid the foundation for everyone being kind by saying, I know that I can be the meanest person in the room. So if you want to be mean, then I will be mean to you, which was like, well, basically no one was going to take shots because you didn't want the instructor coming for your neck after that.
Oh my God, that's beautiful.
It was a really good job. I don't want to say the name in case he doesn't want that story going around, but it really worked. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like that was like our first day orientation was a bunch of teachers being like, don't be an asshole. Like there's ways, because there's totally ways to still provide criticism, and you should, because like it's equally terrible to get a workshop where you submit something and then everybody's just like, no, I like really liked it and it was really great and I have no notes and I don't actually have anything insightful about the characters to tell you or anything. It was great, I really loved it, keep up the good work. And it's like that's useless to me. But if you can find that happy medium where you can like give constructive criticism but just like not simultaneously tell somebody that they're horrible. Why have you ever written a word? You know, like all of that nonsense. It's like super unnecessary and not helpful to anyone, you know. You do hear horror stories. Mostly I feel like the bad versions of workshops that I have haven't been anything where somebody like tried to tear me to shreds. It's just people that like flat out didn't understand what I was doing, or those workshops where like, this is not an exact thing, but like where you do a workshop and somebody like comes in and is like, oh, I thought for sure that your main character was dead and it was a ghost. That's not what that was? Oh, well, I guess I've scrapped everything I say. Like stuff like that, where they just like completely are off base.
And you're in the chair of silence, and you're just like, no.
Yeah, and you're just sort of sitting there with your lips zipped, being like, this is all useless.
Yeah. Going back to what you said about, you know, like Paul being like very much a sentence-focused writer, and you kind of loving plot. I'm curious, with this book, did you have like character or plot in mind, like that was your launching off point, like the actual situation, or was there like a certain image that you started with?
Yeah, a little bit of all of that. I am very much a plot person, and so as I was initially writing it, I definitely like to outline, but then I don't like to be one of those people that's so rigid about outlines that I'm trying to force the book into what I want it to be. And so I'll regularly chuck out whatever outline I had and kind of start from scratch when I figure out that halfway through my character doesn't want to do this at all, you know. And so I'll be pretty flexible. I did have a few starting ideas, just sort of images really in my head that started to kind of coalesce as this kind of came together. The book has some really fantastical images in it. Basically, it's about these people on a generation ship, but the ship itself inside looks very similar to just the natural world that we live in now. It was designed that way since everybody was going to be on it for like 200 years. It was designed to basically just look like a bunch of cities and natural landscapes, and it's roughly the size of Switzerland. And so I had a lot of images kind of floating through my head at the very start, even before I think I decided that I wanted to put it on a generation ship. Just this idea of a world that's mostly like ours, but a little left of center and a little bit more designed. There's a point in the book where the characters visit a town up in the mountains, and the mountains are partially made of stained glass because the town itself is sort of a religious mecca of a place. And then I weirdly get a decent number of ideas from dreams that I've had. I think generally it's a bad idea to try and fashion a book out of things that you see in dreams, because dream logic never makes sense. And that's why everybody starts to glaze over and look bored whenever you tell people what you were dreaming the night before. But I do end up finding a lot of images and things that have come out of dreams that ends up really useful. And like years ago, before I even really knew exactly how I wanted it to fit into anything, I had this dream of two people sitting on the sky amongst the stars, and they were upside down looking down at the world below, and the sky, instead of being an actual sky, was just a giant metal tin can with holes punched into it, and that was the stars. And then they were just sitting up there staring down at the world. And I remember waking up and thinking that was a really beautiful image and not knowing what to do with it, but just kind of keeping it in my head for a long time. And then realizing when I started to kind of put this together that that was going to be a very significant point in the book, that these characters would have the ability to do that, because the world isn't really a world, it's just a big old tin can in space.
I like that. Have you always been interested in sci-fi? Has that always been like the direction you saw your writing going toward?
No, oddly enough. I think I always knew that I was probably going to end up doing genre writing, and I have a feeling, hopefully, you know, if all of you people are nice enough to buy my book and I can keep writing things, I probably would like to jump around within genres a little bit, but I do feel like most of my writing tends to take a genre-y turn. So I read literally just a little bit of everything. I love horror books. I love experimental stream of consciousness, Virginia Woolf style stuff. I love Paul Harding, but I also love Douglas Adams. I love sci-fi. I love fantasy. I love comics. I love memoir. I love everything. I read it all. And I generally think that that's the better way to do things, because then you do end up with, you write what you read, and then hopefully, if you read a lot of different things, then you have more available to you to make your writing some quite unique hodgepodge of all of it. So I'm not even sure when I started writing this that I thought it was sci-fi, and then I realized, like, oh, of course it's sci-fi. I put a spaceship in the book. But the book that I'm working on next, so far it's turning out to be more of a haunted house book. So it's not quite sci-fi at all, but it definitely kind of still fits within fun, weird, genre-y things. So.
Were there any books in particular that you feel like are sort of like the grandparents of your book, like ones that you were really drawing from or felt like moved by and sort of pushed your book along?
Yeah, there are definitely a few. For one thing, I spent a lot of time, because you get that advice in a lot of workshops, a lot of programs, a lot of blogs where people are giving advice to writers, where they'll say, write the kind of book that you've always wanted to read. And one of the books that came out a few years ago now, that when I read it, I was like, I could read this book and just this book for forever, and this was great, was Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. That book was just like this perfect combination for me of literature, like literary kind of style conventions, lots of human connection, but also it's like a post-apocalyptic book, and it's about a Shakespeare troupe, like it's like all of these things at once, and it fits together so beautifully. And I immediately was like, I want to write a book like this. And so a lot of The World Gives Way is definitely, at least at its core, inspired by that book. I don't think I'm alone in that. I feel like there's a lot of other books that have kind of popped up in the years after that book that are doing the same thing. We all owe a great debt of gratitude. I'm a huge fan of Calvino. And so I was reading a lot. I've been obsessed with Cosmic Comics and Invisible Cities for quite a long time now. And so short stories like Distance of the Moon, where the surreal and beautiful, like wondrous nature of some folks just paddling out in a rowboat, sticking a ladder out and being able to jump onto the moon, was just like one of the most stunningly beautiful things I'd ever read. And then Invisible Cities is like really, really in the DNA of this book, especially because I have these interstitial chapters in the book that I basically put in there as a way to sneakily put in some world building without me having to throw in like really shoehorned expository dialogue. But I wanted to make them beautiful and useful in ways besides just exposition. And so I started, I was on a plane rereading Invisible Cities, as I just do sometimes. And it was like a light bulb going off in my head. I was like, oh my God, this is how I can do this. If like, because Calvino, for those that haven't read Invisible Cities, does these like crazy, strange vignettes where it's Marco Polo talking to Kubla Khan, and he's just talking about all of these cities that he's supposedly visited, but it's becoming increasingly clear that maybe these cities are just in his head. Maybe these cities are just different modes of existence. Maybe it's memory. It's like all of this crazy, amazing philosophical stuff. And every time he describes a city, he's describing a city, but like by the end of the vignette, he's also describing the human condition and the life of the mind and all sorts of other weird philosophical twisty things. And so I was basically, I aped that a little bit, and I did these interstitial chapters where I described different cities within this Switzerland-sized spaceship. And within that, I also was able to kind of get a little bit more poetic and weird and talk about, human beings' relationship to death and other fun topics of conversation.
Yeah, I was surprised in your reading to hear New London referred to as a beautiful place, because I'm from Rhode Island and never say anything good about Connecticut ever. But
I actually, I take the New London ferry quite a bit, and it's a perfectly fine town. I will say nothing about New Londoners because like their ferry is very, very useful to me, and I've dined at many fine establishments looking over the water. But it's a town. It's fine. I'm not from Rhode Island, so I don't get to have any real opinions on Connecticut or New England in general. I just sort of I've lived in New York for the past 15 years now, but I originally came from the Pacific Northwest. So anytime anybody has opinions about different parts of New England, I'm like, I'm gonna step far away.
It's not the reason anyway, so yeah, it's best to stay away. I saw somewhere that you used to work at Book Court in Brooklyn.
Yeah. Yes, I did. I miss it.
Yeah. Were you there when it closed? I was working at Stories Bookshop in Park Slope when they closed, so I was also a Brooklyn bookseller at the same time. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I was working there when they closed. By the time that they closed, I was working there mostly part-time because I'd actually gotten a job working at an art gallery in Chelsea, but and even though that was a full-time job, I was sort of no, but I'm still working here though.
Yeah.
And I would do just part-time shifts here and there. And actually, as I'm sitting here, just past my computer screen, I can see a Book Court bookcase standing against my wall because they gave the bookcases to the employees when they closed down the store. Yeah, I miss that place. But honestly, I was just so happy to be a part of that because I feel like it's its own little bit of Brooklyn history and literary history, and also I met people there that really have, speaking of people that have done me too many kindnesses and didn't need to, but still did, and were really wonderful about it. I was working there around the same time that Emma Straub was working there. And of course, now Emma has gone on to open up Books Are Magic just a few blocks away from where Book Court was, which basically made everybody in the neighborhood breathe this huge sigh of relief because we're like, oh, thank God there's a bookstore still. It would have been it was really sad just regardless, but the fact that she then went to open up a really beautiful bookstore not too far away made things much nicer. And she helped me. She sent letters when I wanted to go to an MFA program, and she encouraged me and helped me out when the book was coming through, and she let me read at her bookstore, which was nice. And generally speaking, she is lovely, and that bookstore is lovely. And if there wasn't going to be a Book Court anymore, I'm glad that one's there. But yeah, Book Court was wonderful, and it was a really great place for readings because it had that gigantic big back room with this big greenhouse skylight window, and it was gorgeous.
Yeah, Books Are Magic kind of has that similar space now where it's cavernous in there a little bit, not quite.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, it does. There's that back area. You have to descend a set of stairs, and suddenly the ceilings are vaulted, and there's bigger windows, and it's really pretty.
Yeah, exactly.
They've done a nice job with that. I liked Stories though too. I mainly lived in Carroll Gardens when I was around there, so I didn't get over to Stories as much. But that's a great bookstore.
Yeah, I actually was there last summer. They went out of business during COVID, so I'd left and moved back to Rhode Island, but went back to help them close down, which was very sad. But I was happy to be there for the last days of it. And actually, when we were packing up what was last of the inventory, I was running down to Books Are Magic for their empty book boxes so that we could move. And the bookseller community is great. People are so supportive. I'm glad to be in it in Los Angeles. And you're a bookseller in the Hamptons now?
Yeah. I'm actually about to close up shop for a little bit, and then well, they're not closing up shop. I don't own the shop, but but I'm about to head out for a while, and so I'll be leaving the bookstore at the end of July. But yeah, I work at Southampton Books and Sag Harbor Books. And they're also really lovely people, and just in keeping with the standard that I feel like I always encounter at independent bookstores, they've been super supportive of my writing. They've been really kind about supporting the book and publicizing the book once it came out. The owner of the bookstore is a big sci-fi fan, and so he was one of the first to read The Galleys, and he's sort of gruff in his opinions about things. So I also knew it to be true that if he didn't like the book, there was no way that he'd be able to lie to me. Mm-hmm. And so when he told me that he liked it, I was like, oh God, because I could trust that he meant it.
Yeah.
It was this huge sigh of relief that Greg of Southampton Books liked my book, because he was such a huge sci-fi fan that I knew that if it didn't pass muster with Greg, then it probably wasn't going to pass muster with many other people.
That's great.
Yeah.
Before I let you go, do you have a staff pick at your bookshop that you want to plug real quick? We're plugging your book plenty here. You got one that you want to shout out, another one you want to shout out?
Sure. I mean, I have so many opinions. And also the bookstores, the dual bookstores of Sag Harbor Books and Southampton Books are riddled with shelf talkers. That's just all we do when the store is slow, is we just sit there and take out little note cards and tape them to bookmarks and shove them in the bookshelves. So like, we have opinions, I swear to God, on like 50% of the books in the store. I'd say some of my big favorites, besides Invisible Cities and Station 11, which definitely have shelf talkers by me on them, is I'm a pretty huge fan of Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. I was really, really sad when he died last year. That book is a book that I recommend to just about everyone, because I haven't met a person that doesn't like it. Because it kind of does that thing where it's like almost fantastical, but it's not, and it's kind of a Dickens story, but it's not, and it's historical, but it's also doing a bunch of other stuff as well, and it's like this love letter to books. And usually all I have to tell somebody is this book features a secret underground library in Barcelona, and they're just like, yeah, sold, I'll take it. I also went absolutely crazy for the book Piranesi when that came out recently. And that book is like just so full of wonder and beautiful and strange. And I don't know how Susanna Clarke managed to pack so much beauty and story into such a small book, but she did. And then also, what was the other one that I was thinking about? In a completely different vein, because it's not fantastical at all, but I recently read Brandon Taylor's short story collection, Filthy Animals, and that completely knocked my socks off. And I've never read characters the way that he writes characters, but it's very realistic fiction, but it has prose that will absolutely just like suck your soul out of your body. It's so good, and the characters are so real and so visceral, and the way he writes is so physical and just, again, visceral, that like I feel like whenever I read anything he's written, I'm like aware of my own skin as I'm reading. So that book absolutely killed me as well. But yeah.
3 great recommendations. Thank you for those and for taking the time, Marissa. Today's guest was Marissa Levien, and she was discussing her first novel, The World Gives Way. You can order your copy of the book or any of the others mentioned on today's podcast at skylitbooks.com, or swing by and find them at the store. Thanks everyone for listening, and thanks Marissa for stopping by.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Skylight Books podcast series. Please don't forget to visit our website at skylitbooks.com and make sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast for more author talks and bookseller conversations. You can find us on Podbean, iTunes, and Spotify. Stay safe and healthy, and we hope to see you back in our store soon.